Hey, you're listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that dares to educate and engage individuals on mental health through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and on this episode, we are talking about 1987's The Gate to prepare you guys for the spooky season and to perhaps push you guys towards a fellow film festival. He is a longtime friend of the show. It's been a long time since he's been on the podcast. And he is a podcaster. He is a film festival director and the head of the Farside Network. He is the director of Skate or Die Film Festival, celebrating its first year this year. Mr. Justin Harlan.
Hey, what's up, Josh? How are you?
I'm good, man. It's like I said, it's been a while.
It has been. And actually, last time I appeared on one of your podcasts, I talked about a movie I only marginally like. And this time I get to talk about a movie I absolutely love.
What was the last movie we talked about?
Rob Zombie's Halloween. We talked about Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, which is my favorite. Well, maybe not my favorite, but the most interesting Halloween movie, in my opinion, in the whole series. But it doesn't mean I actually love it. I only marginally like it. I don't really like the Halloween movies, but we've talked about this before.
Well, then I guess that seems fitting because now the boots are on the other side of the podcaster, because now we're talking about a movie that I only marginally like. But before we get into that, let's jump into talk about Skate or Die, because this film festival is probably one of the most interesting concepts that I have heard of since doing independent cinema and covering festivals. So tell us a little bit about this film festival.
Well, so I've been around in film circles for a while, and I've gone to a lot of festivals and things, and while I love the film festival vibe of like, let's watch a movie and then sit in the lobby and bullshit about it and then watch another movie. Like I love that vibe, but I want to do something different. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to have another film festival like that. There's enough like that. So I wanted to do something that had a wide variety of stuff. So like I'm doing a film festival at a roller rink. So of course there's going to be roller skating. And then my background's in live music. So of course there's going to be live music. I podcast. So of course there's going to be a live podcast. You know, I mean, you know, and on top of it, like I like to eat. So there's going to be food. I like beer. So there's going to be beer. You name it, man. We're going to be doing a lot of different things.
So you got to talk about how the inception of this kind of started, because I have tried to wrap my mind around where all of these worlds kind of collide, and I keep coming to like this like dead end road sign.
Well, they all collide in me. I'm how they all collide. but ultimately, here's what it is that so my wife plays roller derby. I don't know if you're aware of this, but my wife is a roller derby skater.
I was not, but I am now.
Okay. Well, over the pandemic, the rink they used to rent to practice at, they weren't sure. I guess the rink is run, or now it's run differently, but it was owned, and it still is owned by the local historic fire company. They are an active fire department, but they also own this historic rink that's in a park called Ringing Rocks that has rocks that ring, hence Ringing Rocks, right? And it's a place that people used to come from the Philadelphia area back in the late 1800s to ring the rocks and walk the trails, and then they built this like banquet hall there that eventually, after it burnt down, got rebuilt and turned into a roller rink in the 50s and 60s, and it just became this thing. So it's a historic site, really cool site. And my wife's roller derby team, who had previously rented it a couple nights a week to practice, is actually took over the lease as to run the whole rink. So they actually run the rink now. So like they practice there, of course, still, and they hold their events there, but they also hold open skates and private parties and all the stuff a roller rink normally would. And so as soon as they like started doing that, and like life was kind of closed and they weren't really doing it yet. They were kind of prepping it. And then like life kind of reopened, a little bit and with this COVID stuff. And I went to the board of directors who happened to all be my wife's best friends, as well as like good friends of mine as well. And I was like, hey, so guess what? I'm going to do a film festival at your rink and you can't say no. And they're like, that sounds awesome. And that was kind of how the whole thing began. And one of the other things that really like inspired it is one of the movies we're playing. It's called Murder Drome. It is a exploitation horror film from 2011, I believe. But it's a movie that back when I first saw it, which is basically when it came out, I was like, man, we got to show this at a roller rink. This movie has to be shown at a roller rink because it's literally about a possessed roller derby girl who kills her team and all the people at the rink. So it's a wonderful delight, and I really want to show it at a rink. And so, like, that is kind of the impotence of everything. And then all the other stuff is just stuff I wanted to do. So I put it in the festival.
I'm still trying to like wrap my mind around like how you kind of like organize this as far as like can you kind of walk through like the landscape of everything, because are the skating going on at the same time as the films is like
no skating will not be going on during the films. That's a fair point. Okay, so I grew up going to concerts at roller rinks all the time when I was a kid in the 90s. So like in the 90s in North Jersey, one of the biggest concert venues was Skaters World, which was a skating rink that had awesome concerts. So like every punk ska hardcore band that came through the area that wasn't like big enough to play like some big place in New York City, they were playing at this roller rink. And so like I saw Less Than Jake and I saw the Toasters 1,000 times. I saw the Toasters. I saw a bazillion of these bands over and over and over. And so I've always associated roller rinks with music. So that's part of how that happened. But like the actual like logistics are we're going to have skating, but that's a separate thing. So like we're starting off the day on Saturday with a couple hours of skating and a costume contest and stuff like that. But that's the only skating that's actually part of the festival. The rest of the event will, take place on the rink for the most part. So like that's where people will be seated to watch the films. That's where people will be standing to watch the bands. That is where people will be hanging out. So the rink is the main place. And logistically too, if you've been to a roller rink before, I assume, right?
Indeed, I have.
All right. So most roller rinks have that little like couple steps up to like an area that's like the kiddie skate area. So like that kiddie skate area is my vending area. So up there is going to be like, we have Diabolic DVD slinging Blu-rays. We got, a bunch of other cool local, like different crafts and like t-shirt companies. And like, I can't tell you, like, I'm going to go completely broke at my festival because I'm just going to be spending all my money on the cool stuff that people are selling. Like get this, like one of our vendors is called Sugar Anarchy. And her whole thing is she makes awesome sugar cookies that are, in the shapes of like horror characters. So I'm going to go eat like a pinhead, like sugar cookie while I'm there because how could I not, And she's actually doing ones that say skate or die with our logo. So that's pretty cool too. But like, there's a lot of really cool stuff. And like, so I kind of filled it up with vendors up there. And then like, I reached out to local food trucks and cafes and who are going to come set up food outside. So that's where like the logistics come from. We have a local coffee roaster who's actually one of our sponsors. They're going to come serve coffee because, we're all old people who need our caffeine to start the day. So, and then the live podcast is just, a friend of mine who podcasts. I have a bazillion friends who podcast because I podcast. And there's a comic book podcast called Comic Book Gurus. That's actually an WMMR podcast. If you're familiar with, like, they're the biggest radio station for rock music in Philly. And one of the morning show guys produces it. And with a friend of mine is one of the hosts, and I reached out to him. So they're going to do their podcast, and they always do like a Halloween episode where they do like kind of spooky season comic talk. So they're going to do that live with some trivia to give stuff away. I mean, like, I honestly, like, I just was like, what are all the cool things I'd want to experience at a film festival? Like, I have a tattoo artist coming and doing skate or die tattoos for anybody who wants to get one. I mean, ridiculous. We have ridiculous amount of things. I don't even know why I have this many things.
It's like just taking the world of Comic-Cons and film festivals and just shoving them together.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
So let's talk about the lineup as far as films go, because with it
Sure.
being a film festival, your festival is only as good as the movies that you're bringing. We're talking about this one here today, which is The Gate, just kind of like the all ages
Yeah.
film to be seen. Then, as you mentioned previously, Murderdrome is going to be playing. Can you kind of talk about some of the other films that we're gonna get to see in this that
Yeah.
weekend?
So the weekend, the event is Friday night from 7 to 12, and then all day Saturday from noon to like 2 a.m. Feature wise, I'll start with the features. We have our retro screening for the all ages kind of section of the day, which is The Gate. Which you hinted at not loving, but that's because you're like a child and you don't remember the 80s. So we'll talk about that later.
I think I've established this before that I am significantly younger than you.
You are a lot younger than me. Yeah, that's why I'm saying this. Yeah. We have like a decade on each other. So this is my nostalgia and your nostalgia aren't the same thing, but that's okay. So that's how we're starting the day with that's the first feature of the day. And then later on Saturday, we also have Murderdrome. And then we are actually the second ever screening of Profane Exhibit, which is a really dark, extreme horror anthology that we know is not for everyone, which is why we're also counter programming that with horror trivia out in the food court. Like our little outdoor food area is going to have some horror trivia with prizes for people who don't want to watch, graphic beheadings and things like that. The kind of stuff that's nasty, extreme horror, which I kind of like, but not everyone does. And then there is a fourth feature, but it's a secret screening on Friday night. That's part of our Friday night program. So I can't tell you that because it's a secret. So we have 4 features.
Okay. All
you
right.
Want to hear about the short films too?
Yeah, let's go to short films.
All right. So Friday night, some of my favorite short films like ever are playing, and they're all ridiculous, ruckus fun. So Friday night's whole theme is like just come and have fun. So besides the 2 punk bands that are playing, we also have Death Metal by Chris Mcenroy, which is maybe my favorite short of all time. It's only 3.5 minutes long, but it is incredible. And it's basically about a possessed guitar. It's amazing. And there's a short called Crow Hand from a friend of mine named Brian Lanano, who's kind of been, big, like Lanano has been on the festival circuit for years. Chattanooga did a really cool retrospective of all his films last year, which was really fun. Just all short films. And Crow Hand is my favorite. Also a shorter one. I think it's only about 4.5 minutes, but it's about a guy who picks up this crow keychain talisman thing in the parking lot of the grocery store. It cuts his hand, and then his hand turns into a crow and kills everyone. It's phenomenal.
Nice.
A movie, its title, I don't think I can say in your podcast because I know you don't do explicit, but it's a movie that says that's based on a young adult book called Every Time We Meet for Ice Cream, Your Entire Effing Face Explodes, I believe. Yeah. So it's a short film based on this weird young adult. I've actually not screened it. My other programmers have screened it, and I'm actually avoiding watching it till I can see it on the big screen because I haven't yet, and I trust their judgment. And I'm like, you know what? This will be the one that I haven't seen. I'm gonna watch it in live. And then we have Joe Baden, who did The God Inside My Ear and Sister Tempest. His short film Blood of the Dinosaurs, which is like the most screwed up version of Mr. Rogers you'll ever see. That's playing. So yeah, those are the shorts on Friday night. There's actually a couple others being thrown in as well, but those are the main ones. And then on Saturday we have a local shorts block that has the premiere of a movie called Bronco that is starring one of my favorite independent wrestlers named Jeff Cannonball as a killer clown. Some stuff that's hyper local, like from Pottstown, the town that we're in. There's this guy Chad Repko who does awesome little movies called Little Detectives with his family, and they're all in it. His son helped write it. They're just a blast. It's just like family fun fare, you know what I mean? And like, we actually have a 16-year-old director who submitted his first horror short, and it was pretty awesome. And it's kind of got a weird like creep show wraparound, really fun. And that's playing. So yeah, we have a variety of cool stuff in that shorts block, and then we have a couple other shorts, thrown throughout the program as well. But yeah, there's going to be a bunch of fun short films. And yeah, I love. I don't know about you, but I love short films, and what I love about them, or about the film festival experience, is a lot of times it's the only place you really experience short films, because they're not really like out and about on the internet that much. Like, people don't go seeking out short films. So like, film festivals is where I get to get my fix on those.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten a finer appreciation now running Horrific Hope, where you can definitely see, like, I think some of my favorite shorts from last year were like, we screened a Attack of a Killer Sandwich, which was called Witch, which was like, it was under 5 minutes. It was incredible. Then we had one that was like fun. This like really like heavy, like black and white, like retelling of like sexual assaults that was like really heavy. But like, those are like things that like you said, like, you typically don't ever find them, and it's part of that film festival experience, to where not only are you seeing features from other countries that you'll probably never ever get to see again, but you're getting to see bite-sized, up and coming voices in genres that you might not typically watch, or like films that you might not normally see, because like you said, like, we don't normally seek them out. But I want to plug this real quick. Alter is a great short film YouTube channel that does like specializes in like horror, sci-fi, drama. Like, they just have such incredible shorts that are out there.
Yeah, and it's free, so it's freaking cool. Alter's really fun.
Yeah.
And actually, I believe death metal might be on Alter, what I was talking about. So keep that in mind. At least, but I've watched a lot of short films that have been on Alter after I've programmed them at other festivals and stuff. Because this is my first year of my festival, but I helped program Buried Alive for a couple of years with my friend Blaine, who was on the podcast with me last time I was on your podcast. Used to be my co-host of Grindhouse Messiah. And like, I've watched so many shorts, and like, yeah, being part of a film festival has really opened my eyes to the incredible work that short film directors do.
Yeah, and it's also a lot more challenging, I feel like, to take such a concise story and like throw it up into anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes, or however long the story is, because like, you're essentially trying to tell something that's like simple, not overly complicated, but also take your audience through a wide range of emotions and be able to do it in like no time flat.
Right. And I'm going to throw this out there. I'm appearing on a couple podcasts, including yours. And if anybody is in the Philadelphia area and goes over to skaterdiefestival.com and buys tickets, over on the Eventbrite page, throw in the promo code podcast for $5 off. So.
Well, you guys heard it here first, maybe.
Yep. Well, it is first. You're right. You were the first one I said it on.
So you guys heard it here first. Make sure that you guys go check it out. But let's jump into The Gate. I had never heard of this movie, but it has that 80s charm that I feel like movies like Gremlins has, The Goonies. Yep. This movie reminded me of Ghoulies a lot. I don't know why. It just kind of had that
good.
like
Except it's good.
Similar vibe. No, get out of here. I love Ghoulies.
I just wanted to be a jerk. You're right. This movie is so 80s. Like, all right, so like almost everything about this film is 80s, like when you watch it. So being that you're like a, kid in the 90s, whatever, but but I mean, like, I say that to say, like, it's so funny. My wife walked in while I was rewatching it. This is like the bazillion time. Believe it or not, she's never seen the film, and she was actually intentionally holding out to watch it on the big screen for the first time. Since when we announced it. But But yeah, she walked in and she's like, "Oh my god, this soundtrack feels like it was like directly lifted and put in Stranger Things." I was like, "Yep." You know what I mean? Like it has that like that so very 80s sound. And then you watch it and like everything about it. It's like, I mean, they're summoning demons with lyrics from metal albums. Come on, how more 80s can you get than that?
And it should also be worth like mentioning that this movie, it comes off the tail heels of the Satanic Panic in the 80s, which I think was like 83 to like 86. And it was like this time, if you guys are unfamiliar, it was basically this time in the 80s where a lot of religious groups had caused like a lot of uproars, saying that like everything fantasy related or just about anything everywhere was of the devil, like Mama Boucher would say.
Yeah. And so it's kind of funny looking back at it, although like the horrible things that were done in the name of the Satanic Panic, some of them are not funny to talk about. But yeah, there was such a moral panic out there that like people were getting blamed for stuff. I mean, you look at like even as it stretches, not during the heyday of the Satanic Panic, but you look into the 90s and you see like the West Memphis Three, who are, vilified because they're quote unquote devil worshippers, but they weren't. And because they were into metal and trench coats and whatever. And then they got, put away for how long and finally evidence exonerated them. But that all said, right, is that, I mean, like that 80s Satanic Panic is important to, I think, the context of some of the film, and that the idea of like this, again, these metal lyrics are actually summoning the devil in this movie. And like, I also thought it was kind of cool. And there had been an interesting resurgence in the late 80s of, and there is again more recently now, of like Lovecraft stuff. And they kept calling the demons the old gods, which was pretty cool. So it was clearly very Lovecraft inspired. And connecting to the horror world in, the 90s and now, very famous guy who lends his voice to Chucky, Stephen Dorff. He's a little child in this movie. This is an old Stephen Dorff movie. He's a youngin'. Oh, that's Brad Dourif. Oh, I messed it up. So he's not the voice of Chucky, but you know what he is? He is the villain in Blade.
Yeah, I was just about to say, man. I was like, come on.
Like Dorff. Oh, that's wrong. But Stephen Dorff. Wrong Dorff versus Dorff. I don't know. I was like, that voice doesn't sound right. I'm wrong. Well, whatever.
Yeah, so this is a very young Stephen Dorff too. I think he's like
very young,
like maybe 13 in this movie.
Yeah, well, he plays a character that's like 10, but yes, I think he's 30. Yeah, I think he's only he's at middle school age in real life probably, but I think he's only 10, 11 probably at this point in the film. As far as how old he's playing.
Yeah. So before we jump into like getting into like the spoilers for this movie is now streaming. If you guys have a library card, you can stream it for free on Hoopla. That's where I streamed it from. And if you can't make it out to Skate or Die in the Philly area this Friday, October 7th and 8th, come back and just check it out on there. And I don't want to say that I absolutely hate this movie. Because I didn't. I had a lot of fun with it. I think a lot of my issues with this movie lie in the third act, just from a narrative standpoint, if that makes sense. Because it feels like this movie wraps up probably about like the 56 minute mark, where they put the demon back into the book, or like he goes back into hell. Then like they spend the last half hour kind of dealing with the aftermath of that decision. I was like, I don't know, man. It just kind of seems like they're reaching for this ending here.
Yeah, I don't disagree necessarily, but I think the practical effects are so cool for the whole like second half of the movie that I don't care. I do think there's some narrative issue. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. But like, I think I'm not one of those people that like cries like CG is bad, everything has to be practical. But when I watch a film from the 80s that does practical so well, I'm like, man, the effects in this movie are just so much fun.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. I absolutely love the effects in this movie. That was probably one of the strongest things that I feel like this movie does. Like, your wife brought it up, but like, this movie has a banging soundtrack, and I think that's worth mentioning. But like, also, like, the practical effects in this movie are just absolutely incredible. It's like a mixture of like practical effects, but like it also has that like stop motion quality that you would get in substitution for the computer generated stuff. And
Yep.
I miss eras like that. And like, I'm still glad that there are still kind of making stop motion animation movies, but you kind of don't get it. And like, it has this like almost like flawless like transition between like the live action and like the way that it uses practical effects. That's really dope.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I said, I said the same thing just a couple seconds ago, more or less in different words, right? Because I just think the stop motion's a good point too. It does really well with the stop, very Harryhausen style almost. If you're familiar with Ray Harryhausen's, like, Jason the Argonauts and all the old stop motion stuff, like that, it has that kind of vibe to it. And like, I think that the 80s charm for me as an 80s kid feels so like at home. I think also that practical effects is so big for me, but like, I also have nostalgia film. Like, I grew up with this film. It's 87. I was 6 years old when this came out. I was 5 or 6 when it came out. And so like, I basically, I remember, I don't think I saw it at 5 or 6, but I probably saw it in the early 90s, 10, 11. And I thought like, oh man, that's so cool. I showed my kids this movie far too young. I did that with several movies, but that's a whole nother story. But I showed my kids this movie, and my oldest had already started to watch some like gateway horror with me at like 6, 7 years old. And his little brother was probably 4 when we first watched this movie. And if you think to about a third of the way into the movie, there's a scene where the parents come home and the father's head implodes and turns into like, hold on, geez, that truck driving by was really loud. I live on Main Street. I'm sorry. So yeah. So I was just saying that his head implodes and like maggots and friggin' worms crawl out of it. And the mom just starts laughing her head off at the whole thing. It's this weird, like, and then you find out, like, you don't know if it actually happened, and they disappear, and it's this weird, like, who the hell knows what's going on? But like, my 4-year-old walked out of the room upset as hell. I had to pause the movie, make sure he was okay. And then he had no desire to watch it. And I was like, that's fine, buddy. You do not have to watch this movie. I'm so sorry. But then like a day, we stopped it. And then like a day later, my older son was like, can we watch the rest of that movie? And I was like, well, yeah. So like, you know, he and I watched it at that point. But like, yeah, it was just, it was one of those movies that I associate with like the term kinder trauma. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because it's a movie that like a lot of people, I think in my generation watched quite young because it was PG-13. Actually, when it was first released, it might have even been called PG because it was on that 87's that year where 86, 87 where PG-13 really just came to be. So yeah, I don't even know whether or not it was called PG-13 back then off the top of my head. It is now, but it might have actually been released as PG when it first came out. So yeah.
I can definitely understand how like a movie like this like could traumatize because it feels like it has that like wholesomeness that like you would see in like Gremlins or like the Goonies, like we previously mentioned. Like it has a lot of that like charm with its two lead characters, but it kind of almost feels like it's kind of like anarchy approach to its storytelling where it feels like a lot of that, but it also at the same time, like tonally speaking, it feels like it like feels more in line with like Monster Squad, which is kind of like a big middle finger to a lot of those other 80s movies.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of similarity. Monster Squad is probably my favorite movie when I was a kid. You know, I grew up watching that in Goonies nonstop. And Christmas Story before it became this like thing everybody watches a bazillion times a year for a 24-hour period. I grew up, you know, actually watching that on a VHS tape, you know, but that said, this movie definitely shares a lot of that same DNA as something like Monster Squad. I don't disagree with you there. It has less problematic stuff than Monster Squad does. Monster Squad.
True.
I love Monster Squad, but like for the longest time, every time I watched with my kids who had watched it several times, every time we'd have a talk afterwards. So we don't use that F word that ends in a T. We don't say that regularly, like the 10 times it's used in this movie. We don't, you know, like a lot of those things. It's just like when I watch Goonies and there's those stereotypes of the Asian family, and I'm like, ooh, that's pretty rough. But it was the 80s. I'd like to say we didn't know better, but we were jerks.
I don't know. I don't know. You know, there are some things that like didn't didn't age well, and like I mean, exactly. My generation has it as just as much as your guys' do. Like, there's a couple of parts in this in the Gate that I was like watching. I was like, that did not age well.
Sure.
And like, but again, I think it's also like when you watch a movie like this, whether you're watching it for the first time or the 100th time, you have to take into consideration a lot of the cultural context that we've kind of talked about on here from both a like the satanic panic that was kind of in uproar going around the time, but also like the type of movies that were being made around this time as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. I will say one of those triggers that people always talk about, which is this isn't about not aging well, but just one of those things. If you're listening to us talk and you haven't seen this movie and you think I should watch it, I think you should, but go in knowing, yes, there is a pet death that's pretty rough in this movie. You know, so you can go to doesthedogdie.com and you will find out the answer is yes. But there's some interesting twists to that too. So
yeah, I was really surprised that they had the dog die in this movie, because I've seen so many horror movies that are very similar in tone to this that like avert that. But you're right, like there is like a nice twist in kind of the last like 5 minutes of the movie that kind of like undoes that. But we're in spoilers, so like I'm just gonna just say this is like when the dog dies, it's like context of the movie, like when they summon the demon only goes away by having 2 human sacrifices, and like I guess like the two human sacrifices that like kind of like let me down about this movie is that like it didn't stick and they decided to go for that like happy ending in the end. It just I don't know. Was that like something of the 80s too where you had to have the happy ending?
I mean, I think for the most part, yeah, I think so. I do think that the happy ending was often a necessity. But that said, I think that the dog death thing that got me, right, wasn't even just that the dog died. It was these really crappy teenagers carrying the dead dog around like it was nothing. This one kid just walks around with a dead dog under his arm, like I'm just, oh my god. The teenagers in this movie, outside of the older sister, are all horrible, horrible human beings.
Horrible human beings.
Yeah,
Yeah, like the fact that like they like the central like trio of characters has like experienced this tragedy and they're like, yeah, we've come to party and like we still want to, get drunk and have fun. Like it's like, dude, like why? Like have some mercy for your friends.
no doubt. Yeah, they're just awful. And like, I don't know if you noticed this, and the one girl who's got the very like Cyndi Lauper vibe to her, she she has the worst hair of all time. She has this weird thing where it looks like she's something about Mary hair, where it's spiked up in the front for no good reason, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I'm like, yo, I lived through the 80s and I don't remember girls who did their hair like that in any way that weren't like walking out of bed without, with their hair messed up. I mean, that was not, yeah, she was awful.
That was one thing that like I like noticed is like because there's a scene where like she enters into the kitchen and she's talking to Al, who's the sister, and just like I was like, man, there are a few things that like didn't age well about this movie. We've already established it, but like the styles in particular, I guess it's just whoever did her hair like needed to be fired because it looks
Yeah.
bad even at like all these years later.
Yeah, it's not good. And I can't even blame it on the 80s because I don't think it was good in the 80s. I mean, it's just bad. Yeah. But ultimately, like, everything else about the way they dressed and looked felt, on point for what I remember 87 being. And it better be because they were made it in 87. It's not like it was a nostalgia piece. It is just a movie made in the 80s. But like I said, like that's comforting to me. And that's part of like what led me to want to show this film. I have a lot of friends who consider this like a favorite film. So, and like the other tie-in for me on why we're playing at the festival is one of our sponsors is Rough Cut T-shirts, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but like they make really, really fun horror and like exploitation film T-shirts, and they have their aesthetic is very punk rock, which makes sense because like the people who founded the company are like punk rockers who love film. They the main idea guy behind the T-shirt company is also the host of the Cinepunks podcast and runs the Cinepunks website, named Liam, and he's a friend of mine from college. And they made a really awesome The Gate T-shirt a few years ago, and I was like, dude, if I show The Gate, can we do reprints of your shirt as like a tie-in? And he was like, yeah. So anybody who bought like a early VIP ticket got a limited edition shirt, and then we've got a handful of them that will be being sold at the festival too. And it's just like, yo, you might not even like the movie that much. I promise you would like the shirt. It's so freaking cool.
I mean, again, I feel like I got off on the wrong foot. Like I kind of shot myself in the foot. It's like I kind of like I don't love this movie, but I don't hate it at the same time. You're just like he doesn't like it. He's got no taste.
Well, I mean, I already know you didn't have taste, Josh. I've known you for a while. I mean, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you. But yeah, I mean, so I have a question for you because I'm going to go into podcaster mode for a minute, Josh, before you do whatever else. So for me, this is like a kinder trauma classic, right? This is like a scary movie for for families and kids. It's a gateway horror film. You know, what are some of your gateway films? What are some of your kinder trauma films?
So I didn't have any like kinder trauma films. All of mine were books and TV shows. So like Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark really were like kind of the gateways into that. Like Gremlins was one that like I saw when I believe I was like 5 or 6 and I was like obsessed with it. And so like the closest thing that I would say to that would be like Gremlins, but like I don't know if I've ever shared this story on the podcast before, but my sister and I were really close to our grandmother, and she ended up she got diagnosed with cancer when I was 8. My sister was 5, and we had just gotten the internet at our house, and like I ended up just diving into like cinema, like studying anything I could, as like it was just a means of escape. And so like that's kind of where my cinephile roots lie. And so like in that research, like I came across things about like Jaws, The Exorcist, Poltergeist, all of these movies. And like so like Jaws was like another gateway for me to kind of come into that. Like I had seen bits and pieces of The Exorcist, but I didn't actually see it till I was already like a full-blown adult. But like yeah,
probably better off to not see the entire Exorcist at like 8 years old, you know. I'm just saying.
But like for my generation, like the thing that kind of like progressed me and kind of like served as like I guess like the big boy gateway into that was probably Saw. Saw and Scream were like the first 2 like films that I'd like seen of the genre of like notable descent, and like kind of like hooked me originally right away.
Well, and Scream's a big one for me in that it's one of the first like horror movies I can remember seeing in a theater without my parents, because like I was right at that age where I could like so it's a rated R movie. Technically, I wasn't old enough to go, but they didn't really enforce that back then. If you were like, I was like 14, you're like, yeah, you look old enough, that's fine. They let you in. You know what I mean? So like I went with a group of friends, and like my parents would sometimes come with me to movies and buy my tickets and then go see a different movie. You know what I mean? Like so we could go to rated R movies sometimes, like. Which is funny. I'm a pastor's kid, and my mom was never really strict the way you'd think, even though she was a pastor. Well, I also say she was a pastor, right? So obviously we weren't super fundamentalist, because a woman pastor is not a fundamentalist kind of thing. But
sure.
I bring that up just to say that, so I grew up a youth group kid, a church kid, and a pastor's kid, but I wasn't really, I think to a large extent my mom trusted my judgment, and I think I demonstrated that, I'd like to think, and I think that's why she did. But so I was able to watch things because she knew I wouldn't lash out or whatever. But yeah, Scream was a big one for me for that reason too. I think Jaws is a great one to note, because to this day I revel, like I revel's not the right word, I'm in awe of the fact that that's a PG movie. To this day, it maintains a PG rating. And I get that it has nothing quote unquote objectionable in it, but holy crap, is it scary? Like a horrifying movie. Horrifying.
Yeah, so I recently, they re-released it, I think it was the Labor Day weekend a couple of weeks ago, and I got to see it in IMAX. And I grew up on this movie. I'd seen it a couple times. I own it on 4K. So it's like I was familiar with this movie, and I never understood why people said that this was like a quote unquote so terrifying movie. When you see it in a theater setting, it completely changes that dynamic, because there is an intimacy, there is a silence, and like that movie to walking out of there, like I was shaking, scared, and it's something I'd never experienced. I was like, I understand it now, like why people say this is a terrifying film, why people were scared to go in the water. And I think that I'm still, even to this day, like still shocked that it's a horror movie, but it's still PG, like you said, because like, you know, it is a slow burn movie, and it feels like a grown up movie,
Yeah.
but like at the same time, like just the way that it's handled, like it still is terrifying. And I mean, Poltergeist is the same way. Like,
Mhm.
you know, it's still a PG movie, but like still a really creepy film.
Without a doubt. And you know, it's interesting. I don't think if it was released today, Jaws would be PG.
Mm-mm.
Because I look at a film like even the first two, especially, well, even the third one, but the Conjuring series. The first Conjuring movie was literally rated R because of its test screening. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but people were so scared they upped the rating from PG-13 to R. And Jaws would be PG-13 had it been released when PG-13 existed. You know, so that's already
Sure.
the thing. But that said, like I think it might have gotten the R rating just for being scary, because that's literally what happened with Conjuring. Conjuring got upped, and then they just kept the series rated R moving forward. I think Annabelle goes into some real blood and guts at some points, but Conjuring itself doesn't. It's really just scary, and that's why it's R. And I say that to say, you know, it's interesting to see how films released in different eras by different people get different ratings. You know, I mean, you know, Spielberg had the PG-13 rating basically created for him. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
like, you know, that's how much cachet he had, you know what I mean? So it's, you know, it's interesting.
We also go like a couple years like later, like he, you know, he had a hand in Poltergeist. Like,
Mhm.
uh, he also at the same time like made the really creepy Close Encounters of the Third Kind a few years after Jaws.
Yeah.
And like there was another movie that like I came across that's like still from that era, that it has this feel to it that is like
Mhm.
scary, but my mind just blanked on it. So how would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, that's okay. And I mean, I think it's just it's an interesting conversation to have. And like, you know, for me, while I definitely count The Gate as one of the films I loved, I didn't watch it repeatedly like I did things like Monster Squad. I watched Monster Squad so many times growing up. Because it was Goonies with monsters. So now you have
Sure.
Goonies plus Goonies with monsters. So I could watch both of them over and over and over. And like they have that, you know, kid adventure feel that things like E.T., that even things like this have, you know, where it's like it's as much of this is a horror movie, it's also an adventure film in a way, because they're having to like work together to solve this thing, and they have to go through, you know, and I think that to me, like that's as much of the allure for this as too, is I think of being, you know, this kid who what would I have done? You know, what would I do? And I think that that's a large part of it for me. And I think these are the good examples. Something like The Gate is the kind of movie that might be hard to get into if the first time you see it as an adult.
Sure.
Because like whereas Jaws, right, we might have seen that as a kid, it still has a grown-up feel and therefore feels like a grown-up movie. The Gate doesn't. I mean, I love it, but it's not a grown-up movie at all. It's a kid fantasy movie, you know. And and while I love it for what it is, I can fully admit that if my first time watching it was as a 30-something year old or late 20s or wherever the heck you are these days, Um, a 19-year-old, whatever the heck you are. No, I just say that to say, I don't know that I would feel the same way if that's the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, like when you factor in nostalgia to a viewing, how it can completely change the way that you see a film, whether that's for good or bad. And this one, in this case, like there's a lot to love in this movie with the Gate, but I feel like if you had that like nostalgia of like I grew up on this, it's something that is like completely different. Like, um, I grew up like one of my we just recently had Jason Marsden on the show, and for those of you guys that like don't know him, he's probably most famous for he's famous for a lot of things, but like Goofy movie is probably one of his most famous roles. And that movie was like played on my house at nauseum growing up. And so like I remember the first time I showed it to my wife because my wife had never seen it, and she just kind of was like, eh. And so like I feel like when you get into stuff like that, like you have the like nostalgia that you have a tied to something like the Gate or like a Goofy movie or whatever you want to throw in here is like it completely changes the viewing experience for you, and it also makes it a little bit harder for people that are coming into that type of movie first time to get into it.
Yeah, I was a teenager when Goofy movie came out, so I had no interest. You know what I mean? So that's a good point, right? So like I've rewatched it. I actually watched it with my kids when they were little. I watched it with my little sister, 6 years younger than me. So I remember it being a big deal and watching it with her. It just didn't hit me the same way because I was 13, 14 years old when that came out. So like, but like I remember when my kids were little, we watched things like Goofy movie and it was great. It seeing it through their eyes changes things for me. Like, I mean, kids' eyes change a lot of things. I always hated the Phantom Menace since it came out. It's not a great movie, but when you watch that through the eyes of a young child, it's a much different movie because it's the stories being told from a young child perspective. Nothing can redeem episode 2, so we won't get into that. But episode 1 has some redemption to it. But that said, I just say that to say, like, yeah, I definitely think when you see a movie affects a lot. That nostalgia or lack thereof can really affect how you look at a movie.
And I also like want to throw in there. Well, first off, we're completely on the same page when it comes to Attack the Clones. Go check out our prequel trilogy episode we did a couple years ago. But one of the things that I think that if you watch a movie like once and you're like, all right, like this was a fine experience, and then you come back a few years later, like once you've like matured and like see it through a different lens, it definitely brings that into a new light. We recently just did our Clerks 3 episode, and on that I shared, when I first saw Clerks 2, I was in high school, and I basically was there for dick jokes and fart jokes. And now being over 10 years in customer service, that movie completely strikes different for me. And I have a finer appreciation for that film because of the experience that I went through.
Oh, without a doubt. Well, Clerks 2 is, to me, Kevin Smith's best film, in a lot, because I think it is best film in its ability to blend his humor with some of the serious sensibilities and like maturity in storytelling. But you're right. If you go into it, like I cried like a friggin' baby watching Clerks 3. I really, really, really loved it. And it's the perfect ending to that series. But, Clerks 2 is a high point for me. But I see exactly what you're saying. And like, and it's not even just nostalgia. It's just that rewatch that you change, I just watched Suspiria, 1977 Suspiria, yesterday for the first time in probably a decade because my wife hadn't seen it. And I've never been a big fan. And I know it's like, oh, everybody loves Suspiria. I love Dario Argento, but that's not my film. For me, it's like, give me Phenomena, give me Deep Red, give me opera. But Suspiria has always been like, oh, it's second tier. It's not his work. It's not, one of his bad films. It's not his Dracula. Please don't watch that film. But I say to say, like, I watched it yesterday and I was like, I think I appreciate this more now. I've always thought like the colors and the kills and that stuff looked great. But like for some reason that stuff hit me better this time. And some of the storytelling didn't bother me as much because I've always felt like he just didn't tell the story well that great in that movie. So like, I think coming at it now that I've got a deeper appreciation of Argento and his influences than I did 10 years ago when I last watched that movie. I can see the Bava influence. I can see, some of the other Italian giallo stuff that I really love influencing that more. And I could see him more and some of what I do love in him more in it than I saw before. So like, I just bring that up to say, you're right. Like, there's great examples. It's not only, the nostalgia factor, but also the reappraisal as you have grown as an appreciator of art. You know what I mean? And I definitely see that for sure.
So one of the things that I feel like, so this movie it's really campy, like for sure. It's got, a great soundtrack, great score to it. But one of the things that I feel like this film did really well is, talking at this film from a mental health perspective is the way that it handles grief. So we talked very briefly about Stephen Dorff's character experiencing the loss of this dog. And the way that the film handles it, like at first, like the circle of D-bags kind of, come in and get played into that, and that's its own subplot. But like, I think just the fact that this film like really lingers and like you actually get to feel for this character and the loss of an animal. We've covered in the past like the benefits of like having pets and like how they improve your mental health, and like the loss of them, like how it has like, their presence having a plus, their deaths having a really negative effect. And I feel like the film handles that really well and showcases that in a really accurate depiction. So it makes the, as much as like I have problems with the ending, like actually getting to see the dog come back in the end and kind of like the joy it brings the dwarf character, I feel like is handled really well and is a really accurate depiction of, even from a young perspective, like how mental health and pets have benefits to be connected.
I definitely can see that. I mean, that's an interesting insight there for sure. And I don't do a podcast about mental health, so I don't always think about, mental health connections when I'm watching a movie. No, I'm just saying, just like, I used to do a podcast about, faith in film. So I was always looking at the connections of, faith and spirituality in film, when I was watching horrible grindhouse films about murder and torture. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have made that connection because I'm not keyed into it. But now as you say it, like I definitely see that. And I definitely see how the dog is important to the story and important to the main character's entire being. A catalyst in what makes everything real. Like, so, when that fateful night happens that his parents are away and the dog dies, before that he levitates and he's horrified, because I would be too. The whole scene is horrifying, but that's not what sets him off. Even as horrifying as that is, it's the dog dying, not the fact that he just floated up into the sky and banged his head and broke the lamp, which is pretty horrifying, but it's the deep emotional connection to his dog, right? Like that when he loses his essentially his best buddy, or his second best buddy, because he still has his other best buddy around. But you know what I mean? It's pretty devastating. And I definitely see that connection. And I do think it's interesting that bringing him back may have just been a yay happy ending, but it also does kind of bring a full circle to the story in like how things have been restored. There's a restoration, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you talk about restoration, and like from someone that like I've, I grew up with cats and I grew up with dogs and like stuff like that, and so like, but I've, like my cat, the cat that I had growing up, like was like he was my cat, like he was the family cat, but like he was my cat. kind of thing. And so like when he died, I was actually on tour when he had died, and like I just remember like coming home and just like feeling the loss of that like best friends, like that burden, that like that cat that like stood with me on like snow days, sick days, like cuddled me to sleep, like always wanted to hang out with me. And then like, now, I mean, it took me a long time before I got a cat after that. I think it was like right before I got married. So it's like, kind of having that come full circle, like you had said, like really does make the difference, because like you're essentially learning to on how to love again, and how to open yourself back up to another animal that is unfortunately going to have to take the place of the one who is now deceased.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up with a lot of pets because my mom had allergies and severe asthma. And so like we couldn't have a lot of pets. I had like guinea pig, hamsters, things like that. My guinea pig being the only one that like really ever like came out of his cage, and we kind of like pet and like whatever, because he was a big chunker. We named him Albert because he was fat. Like, he was Fat Albert. Um, there's a kid of the 80s right there, right? I named my fat guinea pig Fat Albert. But like and he died of Windex poisoning, but I don't want to get into that. Yeah. Cleaning his cage. We don't believe that it was wiped out after cleaning his glass terrarium cage well enough. We think that there was some residual Windex because he died shortly after that cleaning. But anyway.
Okay, then.
Yeah. I can joke about it now, but it was also not as traumatic because it's a guinea pig, and I loved him, but you don't have that. So then, as an adult, like when I started dating my wife, before we were engaged, but we weren't married yet, we got our first dog, and then that dog ended up becoming my father-in-law's dog because it kept biting my wife, and we learned very quickly that it didn't do well with female masters, but. But that said, like we would never have given her to the SPCA or something. We were afraid she'd get put down, and we loved her, so she became like a family dog with my father-in-law, and we saw her till her end of days. But our first dog that we then got after that was my first like dog that I fully bonded with and had, and like losing him was the worst, and so I completely get like how devastating that is, because like I've lost grandparents and family and that's horrible. But for some reason, sometimes those pet things can really hit even harder because you see them every day. They're by your side every day. Yeah, it's not a human, but it's like it's like it's a safety blanket. It's part of your everyday functioning to have that dog there. And when that dog's not there, or that cat or that whatever, yeah, I mean it's removing like something that balances your life.
Yeah, I remember the first movie I ever cried at was My Dog Skip with Frankie Muniz, and I remember like just being in like awe, being like, man, like I want an animal that would like just do that, like follow me everywhere, like kind of be that safety blanket. And then, like I haven't had a dog since I've been married. It's not been in our cards yet just because of lack of space and time, but it's coming. But those like the cats that we currently have, man, I mean, like the days that like I feel like anxious or like my mental health isn't that great, like they're there, and they just have like a sixth sense to know it's like, all right, like he's not, I'm not having a good day, master, here I am, kind of thing. And then our youngest cat, that like anytime she hears someone crying, like her first instinct is to just rush in and just be present. And so like the sound of tears just kind of set her off. But it's like, again, like it's really weird. Like you talk about like, man, like losing a family member like that. Like I've lost, grandparents, I've lost friends, I've lost a family, and losing that cat that like even as an adult like was still like probably one of the most heartbreaking events in my life.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, and I think that's a good tie-in. And you think about like a kid who's probably not experienced that kind of loss that we were just talking about with, the way, at only whatever, like I said, I think he's supposed to be 10, 11 years old, and you look at that and you go, man, he probably hasn't experienced all those other things. So losing his dog is even more traumatic, than even for us as an adult. And I mean, that's his everything.
What's really interesting too is like the way that like he handles the situation. Just come to think about it now is like, because he just tries to like write it off. He's like, it's like him and his best friend are talking. He's explaining the dog's death, and he's like, it's all right. He was old. He was bound to die anyways. And it's like even that response on how you handle mental health like showcases that like even at young ages, like it almost kind of feels like we groom children or to kind of like not talk about their feelings. And like given the fact that Stephen Dorff's character is a male, kind of also goes into this toxic ideology that men shouldn't talk about their mental health.
Without a doubt. Yeah. I think that's a really, really poignant point for sure.
Well, Mr. Harlan, I think that's going to do it for us on this episode talking about The Gate. Make sure that you guys, if you guys are in the Philadelphia area, please check out Skate or Die Film Festival. It is going to be held October 7th and 8th. It sounds like it's going to be a good time. So whether you're a film fest, whether you're a cinephile, love punk music, love skating, want to support small local businesses, this is the festival where you can do it. Where can people follow you guys online, and where can people buy tickets?
So skaterdiefestival.com, that's the way to go. Everything's right there. So you go to skaterdiefestival.com. It'll actually bring you right to the Farsighted's website, but the section that's on the festival, there's a buy tickets link right at the top there. We're selling tickets through Eventbrite, and you can go over there. Like I said, use promo code podcast and you get $5 off whatever package you buy. And if you buy your tickets ahead instead of at the door, you get entered for some additional door prizes and stuff, including a $50 gift card to Five Below.
Well, if you guys are filmmakers and you guys are also in the market for other film festivals, consider submitting your screenplays, short films, or feature films to our film festival as well. First film festival of its kind to be horror-centric and mental health focused. You guys can go to filmfreeway.com/Horrific Hope Film Festival to submit today. And we also have links in the descriptions below as well to check out Skate or Die as well as ours. But you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and of course, wherever you guys get podcasts from. And Justin, thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having me.
Until next time, remember that if there is a hole in the ground, it is probably a portal to hell. Stay away.